few weeks ago, I had a bit of an accident. I broke my elbow, I needed surgery, and I've been recovering since. Unfortunately, this made me miss the highly anticipated release of PHP 8.4, but lucky for me, I was able to talk to Brent from PHP Annotated and Stitcher.io, and he brought me up to speed. So here's the entire conversation between us. Enjoy. Thank you so much for joining me, Brent, in our PHP 8.4 discussion.
Yes, hey Sabatino, I'm glad to be here, and such a exciting topic to talk about.
Yeah,
when it's about PHP 8.4, I'm here to share my opinion and thoughts about it. So.
Yeah, I think you're one of the biggest PHP names in the game, so I'm very honored to be talking to you about PHP 8.4.
Well, if all goes well, we'll be talking a little bit more after this one as well, because we want to make this into a kind of series, right?
Yes, exactly. I don't know if people know, but we are both from Belgium. So it's a small country in Europe. And Brent actually did a reach out to me over the summer, and we got talking, and one thing led to another. And here we are, starting our own podcast.
Trying to, but
we'll
see,
exactly.
If people find it interesting enough.
Indeed. But let's dive right in.
Right, yeah. PHP 8.4. Wow. Have you tried it out?
I have, and I also have tried your framework, Tempest. So, I was actually very surprised. I'm a very I don't like change, so I'm very set in my ways. So I started your framework with an open mind, and I actually was kind of surprised how nice it was. I mean that in the best way. So it's so easy, and the way you use attributes in PHP is actually very nice to indicate the routes. Yeah. I really like the simplicity and what you've done there.
Yeah, thank you. It's like the thing with PHP is that it's changed so much, and I just wanted to build something with modern PHP, and it kind of snowballed from there. But maybe Tempest could be a topic for a podcast on its own, because there are lots of interesting things to say about that. It's interesting that you mentioned change and the kind of hesitation towards change, because I feel that as well. And even with every PHP release, I'm super excited about it, but at the same time, I'm like, oh no, okay, we'll have to put in the work. I have to update my force configurations for just my DigitalOcean droplets. They have to be updated. You have to go through the deprecation notices, and even though I think they are really great and helping us move forward, it's still like, okay, and let's put in the work, because and then you have to deal with packages being updated or not updated. It's actually a problem we're running into with Tempest now, because one of the things we said when we started, like, for real, this was a year ago, something like that, and we knew upfront that PHP 8.4 would be the lowest release we wanted to support. So we were working towards like a year in the future, basically, and then basically release something that doesn't have support for any old PHP versions, and getting closer to the PHP release, which was, let me check, a month ago, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. It started to dawn on me that it's so much work if you want to update a PHP 8.3 code base that embraces all like modern things of up until that point, and then want to switch to PHP 8.4. Most of it is backwards compatible, but if you really want to use the new features, there are quite a lot of new things there. Yeah.
Maybe a bit off topic, but how long have you been developing in PHP for?
Professionally, 10 years.
Yeah, all right.
And like on my own, 14, I think.
Oh, wow. Like, so what's your earliest PHP version?
Yeah, well, like the thing I remember, like I'm aware of that I ran into it was that new the short array syntax.
Syntax, yeah. Okay.
Arrived. But it's not really all that early. I mean, that was PHP 5.4, 5.5, I don't know, something around that time. And I remember because I was doing my internship. So last year of college, I was doing my internship at a Symfony CMS building company. They were called Kunstmann. I don't know if they exist still, but they were pretty big back then. And I was tasked with making some kind of Symfony bundle for Google Analytics dashboard in their CMS, something like that. And I was writing PHP, and I used short array syntax because I was like, this is great. It requires so much less typing, and it's so much cleaner. And then code review came in. Yeah, you cannot use it because this is the latest PHP version, and we actually we still need to support all older versions, which is my very first time. I was like, this is stupid. I just want to only support the latest PHP version. On the other end, I mean, I totally get it. Once a project is used, you cannot just start bumping versions. Well, maybe you can, but there's nuance to this. I mean, you need to find a balance there. So, but with Tempest, it's really, really easy because it's just starting from scratch.
So, indeed.
There's no one using it now.
So my first PHP version was also, I think, PHP 5. I think it's the same one you mentioned. And I actually started out as a Flash game developer. And I wanted to have like a little high score board that was set on a server. And I found a little script online that took like a post request and would store it in a database. And that was actually my first interaction with PHP. I think maybe like 14 years ago. And I do distinctly remember the short open syntax. So it was a configuration in php.ini, and that one bit me in the ass multiple times because I was like, it's less typing work, but it's not a default configuration. So you deploy it on your server, on DigitalOcean Droplet, and then you get a blank page. And it was all because the short open syntax. So
there's this like PHP has these like weird edge cases where there's one very specific thing in Tempest that I really had to work around with. If you have a class, I don't know why this happens, but if you have a class and the namespace doesn't match PSR for like the format the composer autoloader basically requires, then somehow, and I don't know why, PHP gives an error that the class was already declared and you cannot redeclare it again, and it doesn't give any more like information about it, and it's super confusing. And like I've run into this problem like 3 or 4 times in Tempest, and I always fixed it. It took me, I have this on a live stream somewhere, it took me like half an hour to an hour to debug the issue the first time, and then I finally found it. It's like classic programming, and like, oh, it's so stupid,
such a simple mistake,
wrong namespace. But then I forgot about it, and I know I mentioned on the live stream, I said something like, I need to take a note of this, and I didn't. And just a couple of weeks later, it wasn't all that much later, but I ran into the same problem, and I did the same debugging session. And I was like, oh, I know there is a solution for this somewhere, but I can't remember. And oh man, and so it came to a point, because this is a fatal error in PHP and you cannot catch it. So in Tempest, what I've just done is the very first line when the kernel boots is just add a custom error handler, right? Or shutdown function, I don't know. And it checks whether the message is like cannot redeclare class. And if that's the case, I just append the string like, did you forget the namespace? Like just as a note for myself, and I don't understand why PHP does this. The error doesn't make any sense. It doesn't give like any trace. You cannot, like, it doesn't say which file, in which file the other class with the same name was declared, of course, because it's in the same file. I mean, when you say it like that, it makes sense. But if you run into this error, and so many, like literally hours I've lost on this.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's kind of like Googling an error and reaching your own Stack Overflow post where you ask the same question.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, PHP. It still has its quirks, but it's like if I compare it to 10 years ago when I started out, what a great language it has become. I mean, there are many things we can say that it's still lacking, but wow, I
truly love PHP because it's like you say, there are other languages that have other features like Node.js with the async stuff that PHP is lacking, but I don't miss it in PHP because you have things like queues in Laravel, which allows you to create like asynchronous jobs on a queue, which allows you to dispatch asynchronous jobs on a queue. So I truly don't miss things like that.
Yeah, so and then there are extensions like Swool and
exactly
React PHP. So
I mean, Franken PHP.
Yeah, also they're pretty cool. And we need to keep our eye on Franken PHP. I think
definitely.
That's going places. So, PHP 8.4, it's a pretty big release. It's the biggest release, in my opinion, since PHP 7.4, and that's because in 7.4 we got typed properties. Can you imagine? Like, I sometimes scroll through my blog pre-PHP 7.4, and I have these code samples, and it didn't have typed properties in classes.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Indeed. Yeah.
Right. So I would say 8.4 is definitely the biggest release since 7.4. And that's like, I mean, there have been many great features in 8, 8.1, 8.2. 8.3 was really, I don't know, not really that exciting.
Yeah,
but
that was a very minor release, I have a feeling.
Yeah. It was also like the first year of the foundation. So I guess it made sense that they still had to like pick up some speed and trying to figure out, okay, what's the direction we want to go in. And then this year, wow. All the things we've got.
It was a very hyped release. Like I said in the introduction, I had a bit of an accident a few weeks ago where I broke my elbow. So I kind of missed the entire release. I was recovering from my injury. So I kind of missed the entire release. And that's where this idea came from. Like, hey, Sabatino and Brent should hop on a podcast and talk about PHP 8.4, where Sabatino doesn't have the experience of Brent. And he's going to be amazed by all the new features of PHP 8.4.
Yeah. Well, but you did already play a bit with Tempest.
A little bit. Yeah.
A little bit of a feeling. I have to say, like, Tempest hasn't been updated to 8.4 entirely yet. It's so much work. And you'll probably understand why when I go through it. Because, it will become clear. Do you want me, like, share my favorite feature first of PHP 8.4?
Definitely. Yes, let's start there.
It's such a simple thing. But if you want to create a new object, and then call a method on it, which is something I pretty often do, actually. You had to wrap it in braces, in brackets. Like the new invocation, like
new user.
New user within brackets, and then save, for example, call save on it. That's a Laravel-like example. But I often use it with actions, action-style classes.
Yeah, I saw your latest video about actions. Very interesting, by the way.
People
it was. I opened the comment section. It was a bit of a mixed bag in there, but I liked it. I saw your blog post. It was like an older blog post. I saw it, and then I like the pattern. I don't know why people are so upset about it. But
I overhyped it a little bit. I said I invented it, which I shouldn't have said. I mean, it's okay. I've been on YouTube for a couple of years now. You get used to the comments, but I'm still recovering from that one, honestly. But my favorite feature definitely are it's such a stupid thing.
Yeah, the omission of the brackets.
You don't need those brackets anymore. So you just say
new user, and just append like set name without the bracket. That's actually very cool. Yeah.
It's such a small thing, but I mean, it's great as well, realizing that PHP is getting more and more of these quality of life features, and not just, if we would get async or generics or stuff like that, those would be really like big features. But we're at a point where, there are still a couple of big things open, but there's room and space for like fine-tuning the syntax of the language. And it's just becoming so much more convenient. And PHP is pretty cool in being able to do it all backwards compatible.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I'm like, there are many features here in 8.4 that people could say, yeah, but we could already do that before. Like, it doesn't really make a difference. And I always point to attributes. Because like I've heard this argument before from people where they say, yeah, but this is just syntactic sugar, it's useless, we don't need it in PHP. And then I point to attributes. I mean, everything that attributes are doing now was already possible with doc blocks, right? Exactly. I mean, Symfony, Doctrine, they did it like when I was doing Symfony 14-ish years ago, 10 years. They were already using annotations. They were called annotations back then, with doc blocks, right? So we could already do it. Why do we need attributes, which is just syntactic sugar or a better way of writing it? Well, I mean, everyone loves attributes, I think. Maybe not everyone loves them, but all big frameworks are embracing them. So, I mean, whether you like them or not, the majority, apparently there's enough of a want for it that frameworks decide, okay, let's embrace attributes. That's one example. Constructor property promotion is another one. Like, we could already do the same things, but it's just a little more convenient. Exactly. It makes me more happy being able to write PHP, and that's a good thing.
Exactly. It's funny you mentioned the promotion, the constructor, what was it called? The constructor property promotion. Yeah, so because that one took a lot of boilerplate code away. Before you would have like a new user constructor, it takes a first name, a last name, and then you say this first name equals first name, this last name equals the last name. You can omit that entirely, and it just saves so much code.
Yeah, it's just like, and we're so used to it now. Again, like, constructor property promotion was such a big thing. Like, you cannot imagine having to do all that work, and you could generate the code with your IDE and stuff like that. But it was just so much text to scroll through with no meaning, no added value.
Exactly.
So yeah, the funny thing about constructor property promotion, like under the hood, it's actually just like using that syntax and then pulling it apart and generating a PHP file. Well, it's not a PHP file, if I understand. They go directly to opcodes, of course, but like they just generate the code as if it wasn't using promoted properties. So it's really just syntactic sugar. It's transpiling on the fly.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. It's like I did some Objective-C and Swift in a past life, and they had this concept called a bridging header, where you could expose things from Objective-C to Swift and vice versa. And that's actually the same thing. It would generate like this magic file. Apple would generate this magic file, or Xcode would, which exposes things to the Objective-C world from Swift and vice versa. So that's actually very reminiscent of the thing that happens here with the opcode or the in-between generation in PHP.
Yeah, it's really a really interesting topic. But that's not what PHP 8.4 is about. I don't know. We've been now talking about the PHP and haven't. Well, I mentioned that one small feature, but there are so many more things. So maybe let's go through my list here. The first thing that besides like the brackets being omitted are property hooks. Have you heard of property hooks?
I haven't actually. I've seen some blog posts, but I restrained myself to not click on it.
You wanted to
learn,
be like really surprised and
exactly.
Property hooks. They are like with every PHP feature, there are opponents and proponents for it. But like, I'm such a big fan of this, and the RFC had such a nice tagline. Well, it wasn't really a tagline; it was like sprinkled in somewhere in between. But the goal of this RFC was for it to be not to be used like most of the time. So the goal of property hooks is that people don't really use them, or like only as like a last resort, basically. And so here's the thing: you make a property on a class, right? And you want some kind of encapsulation and certainty that like people cannot suddenly change the property from the outside or do weird things with it. So the standard pattern here is to have a private property with a public getter, public setter, maybe. That makes it so that you have two entry points. Well, one outgoing entry point, one, that's not an entry point, but doesn't matter. You have 2 points where you can hook into, right? You have the getter and the setter. And if you need to do things with the property, if you need to do validation, for example, if you need to make sure that when a user sets a value for a specific property from the outside, and you want to add validation, you have that method in place. And so what often happens if people want this proper kind of encapsulation, when they code and build their classes, they just have their private properties, getters and setters all in place, and you have just a big file with lots of code.
Okay, right? Let's maybe make an example here. So we have a user class. It takes an email address in the constructor. Then that's going to be private, right? So the property is going to be private, and we have a setter on the user, set email. It's going to do like some validation, make sure it's a valid email address. You cannot add gibberish. And then and if the email address is valid, it will set. It will be set on the property.
Right.
All right.
And so you, like before PHP 8.04, you just always have these getters and setters in place in case you would need them in the future. Because like if you didn't have getters and setters in place, you would have to make the property public. Exactly. And then people can do whatever they want with it, right? Mm-hmm. So lots of overhead, getters, setters, very boring code, and oftentimes not really needed unless you need these extra validation steps, or maybe you want to do something with calculated properties where you have the full name, get full name, and it's just concatenating the first name and the last name, stuff like that.
All right.
And so with property hooks, it turns the problem kind of around. It says, okay, let's start with public properties. All properties are publicly available. And in case you need to add some validation for the edge cases, or in case you need like a virtual property, you can add hooks for them. And hooks, it's like special kind of syntax. You have the property, and you like open curly brackets. Since this is an audio format, we have to describe it a little bit. But you open the curly brackets there, and then like the property gets kind of a body, a function body, sort of. But there's a special kind of syntax there, and you can define a get hook for it and a set hook for it. You don't have to define both of them. There are shorthands for it. They look like functions with like a little bit kind of different syntax, but you'll get used to it if you've written a couple of properties. The things they're optional, right? So only if you need them, you can add the hooks. And the beauty is that they don't add methods anymore on the class. They kind of act like magic getters and setters, but like properly tied to a property. And they will be called, like the get hook will be called whenever someone tries to set a value. Get a value. Get the value from the class, and the set hook will be called like when someone tries to override it from the outside. And then you have these places, these hooks, where you can add your email validation, where you can like concatenate the first name and the last name if you need to. But they are completely optional. So you start, like in 95% of the cases, you just start with public properties, no more getters, no more setters, and you have the certainty that if at some point you need to add some extra logic here, you can just define the hooks, and they will hook into the normal syntax. There's no more distinction anymore between like requiring, like you need a method in place before you can access or read the property, and you make sure you have it in place, because just in case for the future, the idea of property hooks is that properties become more of a first class citizen of the public API of a class, and get and set hooks, they offer hooks and ways to deal with that in a more dynamic
very
way.
Interesting. And can you bypass the setter in any way? Is there a way, for example, in Objective-C, I remember you had setters and getters, and if you would prefix the variable or the property with an underscore, if I'm not mistaken, you would bypass
that's not possible.
the set. That's not possible. So not even from within the class, you cannot override the set. You always go through the set.
Don't quote me 100% on that. But I'm fairly certain that's the case. And but I do think that something's possible with reflection. I'm not sure about it.
Right.
But it was a really long RFC. I read through it twice. It was like it took an hour to read through or something like that. It was really, but it was really good.
Yeah.
They covered a lot of edge cases. So yeah,
but that's an interesting feature indeed. And you could have entirely virtual properties, if I'm not mistaken. For example, the full name you mentioned, it could only have a getter, for example. It would concatenate the first name and the last name. And it would have no setter, and that's totally valid, right?
Yeah. Right. So a property with only a get hook basically means it's a virtual property. It doesn't really exist, but it just calculates something on the fly. As soon as it has a set hook, then there will be some memory assigned for it.
Okay.
And you'll be able to store stuff in it.
And is a virtual property the correct term, or is it?
Yeah, it was used in the RFC.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So virtual property, very cool. It's a very cool feature. I will definitely use that.
Mm-hmm. I think they used another name for it as well. Let me see. Virtual property. It was something like
computed property, maybe.
No, it's like backing value because. Oh yeah, that was like. A property with a backing value means it's not a virtual property. That was like the two words that were.
And the internal, so you mentioned that no memory would be allocated. So only memory would be allocated if it has a setter, right? If it has a set property hook.
If I understood correctly, yeah. But again, don't quite. I'm not an internal developer.
No.
But like,
that's very interesting to hear about those internals. You read through the RFC, so you have some idea how
it
works.
A while ago. I also sat down with Larry, the creator of the RFC. I did a live stream with him to talk about it. And what I learned there, because some people might be wondering about this as well, is that like what's the impact on performance? Because like you feel these hooks are a little bit similar to magic getters and setters, but in a more convenient way. Magic getters and setters, they are less performant compared to just normal property access. And the good thing with this RFC is that if a property doesn't have any hooks defined, it will just be normal property. You can access and read and write to it, just normal. And there will be no performance overhead there.
Okay.
If you use property hooks, there will be a small performance overhead for the properties that have hooks defined. But that overhead is less than if you were to use magic getters and setters.
All right. That's interesting that they were able to optimize it a bit. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it actually took some work because...
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, I remember something around, I think it was the beta period, June, July, something like that, where they ran into some performance issues when people started testing it and they had to do some more refactoring. But in the end, it worked out. And it's really cool. Now, I haven't mentioned the most important part of this RFC, actually, because in my case, I have very little use cases for like hooking into specific properties. But the cool thing is, with this RFC came the ability to define property hooks on interfaces. But that means that you can have you can basically have an interface define a property. And that makes sense, right? Because properties are now, like I mentioned, something more than just private state. They are part of the public API. So it makes sense that they are available on interfaces. And that means that in an interface, you can define a property, but it needs a hook.
Okay.
Right? On the interface, it needs a hook. And you can choose whether it has a get hook, a set hook, or both, right?
Okay.
So the interface defines that. And but the cool thing is, then in the class, you can just still define the normal property without hooks, because there is like a normal get and set access if it's a public property.
All right.
And that just works. So you don't really need the hooks, but on the interface, you use that syntax to indicate like this public property needs getter access, setter access.
All right. That's actually very interesting.
Yeah. And this is like it has a huge impact because I always use the example in Tempest of the request class, which has lots of properties like the method, the request method, the URI, the request body, all these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And in Tempest, we program to an interface. So there's an implementation of request, but like most of the time people are using interfaces. So you need to define getters on the interface because you want to be able to access that data from the outside without having to know, like, I have like this specific implementation of request that I'm working with. So yeah, those kind of interfaces, and this happens a lot in Tempest, they are riddled with boring getters, and you then have to implement them, like get method, return this method, get body, return this body. It goes on and on. But now we'll be able to just define the properties, and then have public properties on the concrete implementations and be done with it. So that's really powerful. In my case, like the get hook is probably the most important, because this is also a thing we do in Tempest. Is most of the time we have read-only classes or use immutable methods. We don't really change data once it's set, unless it's for really internal state within a class. But if we're talking about something like a request or, most of the thing, value objects, data transfer objects, you set data once with the constructor and then you never change it. So the interface doesn't really need to specify anything when it comes to setters, only for getters. And yeah, that's it. It's really great, but it's also a lot of work because we've written a lot of interfaces with a lot of methods, and we have to refactor all of those. So yeah, that's what we're working on.
Yeah, but it's very cool. So I have another question with regards to the, for example, the setter implementation of your property. Is there a way to reuse setters across different properties? No. For example, there's no way. So you cannot say like, hey, my first name or my full name has to go do this magic thing, and I don't know what else needs to concatenate something, has to do the same magic thing. There's no way to...
It's not possible.
Okay.
You can call class instance methods within the hooks. So that's one way you could like move shared logic towards one method and then call that method from multiple hooks.
Yeah, obviously, indeed.
But it's not really super reusable.
Okay.
It would, there might be some room for improvement here, but honestly, like the RFC said as well, its goal is to be not used all that much, but just have
the possibility
the fact that the possibility is there means that people can ditch all or most getters and setters, because just in case I need it in the future, it's possible with just the property access syntax, and I don't need a dedicated method for it. So
yeah, it's a very interesting feature. I see myself using it all the time. And I'm wondering how a framework like Laravel would adapt things like this.
That's difficult, right? Because if you look at eloquent models, they have accessors and mutators where you can like hook into a specific property. They have casters as well. In theory, you could change all of that syntax to make use of property hooks, but imagine the breaking change. That's not going to happen for a couple of years. I mean, Laravel is now starting to add attributes everywhere.
I saw.
Or in most places, except for routes. I don't know. I talked about this with, I think, Christoph Rumpel.
Okay.
I asked him, hey, do you have any plans for route attributes now? No. That's
the thing that I found interesting in Tempest, because you have like the route attribute. So people who haven't used Tempest yet, so you have like a class that defines attributes. For example, route / for example, for the root route. The root route, wow. And then you have your method that gets executed when you visit that route. And to me, that was like mind-blowing. That was like a mind-blowing moment to have this simplicity. But I can see like a framework like Laravel, if you have a lot of files, it's going to be very difficult to keep track of all your routes.
But that's that's the argument, right, against route attributes, that it doesn't scale. That's really like I don't know the right word, a fallacy, something like that. Like you can, the argument for route files in Laravel is that, I just have to open a file and can see all my routes. So I worked in Laravel apps that had like thousands of routes. Yeah, that doesn't scale for one. So you split it up in different files anyway, because like having one file.
Yeah, you have like your API, your web,
API,
your,
admin,
exactly.
Admin section, user facing section, and some, I don't know, lots of stuff. So it doesn't really scale all that well in a single file either. That's one thing. Second thing is you have like the artisan route list command, I think.
Yeah.
That already lists everything. You have an IDE with plugins, maybe most likely where you can get an overview or find routes just within your IDE. So there's tooling around it.
That's true.
That doesn't like, and if you realize the value you get from having a route together with a controller action just in one place, they belong together.
Yeah.
There's never like, yeah, there might be very small cases where a one single controller action has multiple routes, but by definition, you cannot have one route that goes to multiple controller actions. So they always belong together. So just keep them together. You know, every time I made a controller in Laravel, they're like, okay, first step, create the class. Okay, now next step, I need to go to my routes file. I need to edit it. I need to find the right spot where it belongs.
Exactly. It may be in a group. It has to be in the right middleware.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a side note here. But I've written a blog post about it as well, like the case for route attributes. But besides, we were talking about like Laravel being able to adopt this syntax, and they might, but it will take them years, because they're now only started to a year ago, but they started to include attributes, and attributes are pretty easy. When you talk about backwards compatibility, they are just additions, right? But property hooks, they are a massive breaking change if you want to like introduce them into your framework in a non-optional way. So yeah, that will be interesting.
Yeah,
that will be
I'm very curious to see if they will manage.
In probably over time, but it will take years. Yeah.
But maybe on the topic of Eloquent, I used like the accessors, if I'm not mistaken, it's called, and the mutators. But those things bit me in the ass multiple times with like N+1 queries, because you may access something that hasn't been loaded, or a relationship. But I do think with the setters or the getters, I should say, you have that same kind of danger where, for example, if you get I don't know what value you would get, but if there's a calculation behind that value, it could be potentially dangerous to introduce like very hard to debug issues.
True. The same would be true with a normal getter.
Very
if you would do the same in a getter, then I mean. So no, but it's something to look out for, and definitely in an area where you're dealing with database queries and stuff like that. Those are the places where performance usually goes to die, basically.
Yeah, indeed.
So yeah, I mean, like, I don't think there's language syntax that could really solve those problems. It's more of a architectural design problem to think about. It's interesting that you mentioned like lazy relations within Laravel and eager loading and stuff like that.
Indeed.
Because PHP 8.4 also has a new feature called lazy objects.
Okay.
And they basically are a way to have these kind of proxies where you, for example, have a user, or maybe I should use the author and the book example, because that's easy, because I have it in my head. So you have an author with multiple books, and you load an author from the database, but you don't need its books for now. You don't want to load everything, but when you do want to access those books somewhere later down, this is like lazy loading in Laravel, right? Laravel will just go perform the query for you, even though the property wasn't loaded, and will fill that data in the right place, and you never notice it. It does so with a lot of magic, and now PHP has lazy objects, and basically it means that you create a placeholder for example, that collection of books, right? An author has a collection of books, and instead of truly loading the books, you say, I use a lazy object, which is something with reflection you created via the reflection API. And then you set that collection. It's like a fake book collection then. It doesn't have anything in it, but as soon as you try to access it, then it will like
it will get loaded in memory.
And,
okay.
Yeah, and then it will do its thing. It like could also lead to a lot of performance issues, of course. But like when used correctly, and it was specifically designed by Nicolas Grekas from Symfony.
Okay.
I think together with some of the people from Doctrine as well, because those like the ORM style problems are very suited for lazy objects.
So I was thinking in my head, like, are there non-ORM use cases for lazy objects that would benefit your code base? Do you have like an example?
Maybe files or parsing big CSVs with nested data, stuff like that is something
maybe
that comes to mind.
Getting a file or doing a file operation, for example, like a resize of an image, something like that, a resized image property. Yeah. But it's a very interesting thing. I didn't know it wasn't in PHP. It wasn't available in PHP already.
Yeah, and they had to rely on a lot of like black magic even to get it working. Because it already worked like for a decade or something. Doctrine has this proxy manager package, but it relies on so much magic that it's like it's irresponsible.
But this is like a feature that other languages usually have, like C. I can imagine C has something like lazy, or Objective-C or Swift, things like that have. I think even JavaScript has a thing called proxy or lazy objects. This is a beautiful example where PHP is actively implementing new features. It's actually very interesting. And to us today, it seems like this feature was already there. It should have already been there, maybe. Yeah. But the fact that it's there now and to be used, it's just amazing.
It is. Yeah. So that's lazy objects or proxies, whatever you want to call it.
All right.
So let me tell you.
So far, we have like the omission of the brackets. We have the property hooks.
Yeah.
And we have the
lazy objects.
Lazy objects. Yes, correct.
Let me tell you something else here. So back to our property hooks example, we have, you have now public properties, and we just embrace the public properties API, By the way, property hooks, they also work with protected and private properties. But the beautiful thing is that you can have public properties that are just being used directly, and you have like the hooks if you need them, right? But there's one problem with that. Because now your properties are public.
Yeah, I know where you're going with this.
I think. Even the properties without hooks, they are public. You might not always want your properties to be publicly writable. I mean, usually it's the class internally that determines what goes into a property, and you can add property hooks if you need to add extra logic to it, but for the majority of properties, you just want to say, hey, don't write to this property from the outside. I mean, just read it, please, just directly from the property, because that's much nicer than having to rely on getters. But don't ever write to a public property on a class. And so that there was this issue now with property hooks where, public properties, that's all nice. But now we also open the door to little less good things. And so they added another feature.
Okay.
And that's asymmetric visibility. And asymmetric visibility, it is what the name says, but it's it might be complex. But a property has visibility, public, private, protected. And making that asymmetric means that you can set different visibility levels depending on the operation and the write or the read operation. So in essence, you can have a property that's publicly readable, a public getter, but it's not a getter, and then have it only being privately settable, private set, right? And that's really cool, because now, together with property hooks, now we can truly embrace properties as part of the public API, because you have the certainty, you can, if you want to, you have the certainty that properties cannot be changed from the outside, but they are still available there to read, and you don't need extra getters and setters, but let's dismiss setters for now. You don't need extra getters. So you can just have the property, and you don't have to worry about unforeseen side effects.
So to put this into an example, you have a person, for example, who has an age. So who has an age, and you can read its age, but you cannot set its age, because the person needs to have a birthday before its age increases, and only on the birthday the age would increase.
Yeah, so, and then the class would handle that internally.
Exactly. So the class would have like a private has birthday today, you have a cron job running, etc. And that will trigger the incrementation of its age, but you cannot increment the age from the outside.
Exactly.
So that's very interesting. So you, in your property hooks, you could have like private sets, and then public is default, I assume.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the syntax is a little bit weird.
Okay.
Weird. Yeah. You have when you define the property before, it was public book, for example, like public and then the type book and then $book, the variable name. Now you have public private set. Book. So there's that's the asymmetric part. The thing is, like, because you can also have protected set, by the way, so public protected set or protected and then private set. The thing is that the read context must always be more lenient than the write. The write context. So you cannot have a property that's publicly writable but only privately readable. That doesn't exist.
That doesn't make sense either, indeed.
Yeah, exactly. So the first visibility keyword is like the standard, like everything for everything, unless you add a visibility for the set context specifically, and then you add a second visibility. And because public private sets specifically are probably a very common use case, they also made it so that if you just have private set without a public, then PHP will assume that it's a public property with a private set visibility. So yeah, if you see it, it's a bit weird, honestly. But
I'm trying to picture
you need to get
head.
used to it, right?
But because it kind of makes sense, I guess, where so public private sets where if you say private set, that it implicitly means like public get. I think it kind of makes sense, but I'd have to see an example for it.
There's also no public get. It's just public.
Okay.
Right.
So you could have, if you say like, you could say private get private set book. Is that a possibility?
No, then it's just private.
Then it's just private. Okay. Yeah. So if both the getter and the setter are equally, so not are symmetrical, so to say, you don't have to.
You don't have to. It's possible, by the way. It's. I believe it's allowed, but I don't think. I think QA tools will
they will freak out. Yeah, indeed.
So even though the syntax is a bit weird, and it is a bit weird, I mean, we need to get used to it, but we also had to get used to other things in the past. So we'll get used to it. It is really cool, and it is actually. There is some overlap with read-only properties and classes here. And that's kind of unfortunate, because read-only basically means only write once to this property. But in reality, what people actually most often wanted to do is not only write once, but just make sure that people from the outside cannot alter my property. Mm-hmm. And so we used read-only for that because there was no other alternative to it. We used to use read-only properties for this because there was no alternative for it. But now we have our dedicated syntax for it. And actually it means that read-only, it doesn't really become obsolete. But in reality, it will pretty much become obsolete, because in most cases, what we were using read-only for was to make sure that we could have public properties without having to worry about people changing it from the outside. The downside of read-only properties is that even the class itself couldn't change it internally anymore. And that's now possible with private set. What I find unfortunate is just read-only was introduced in PHP 8.1, I think. And it's already now becoming a little bit obsolete. And this highlights for me like PHP internals is just a group of people, everyone with their own agenda, and there isn't really like a clear direction. I really hope the foundation will improve this situation over time. But like Nikita, when he still worked at PHP, and I really liked read-only, by the way, for the record. It was a great RFC, and we really needed it back then. But read-only was added, and now a couple of years later, we get a new feature that kind of makes like read-only obsolete, but not really. But in practice, it will. So we're only a couple minor versions later, and PHP already has become like a lot of code could, in theory, be refactored to be better. And this just highlights to me like some of the problems with how PHP is developed. I don't have a solution for that, but
it's a very tough problem indeed. But it also highlights the discussion we had earlier. Like I'm a very slow mover, and sometimes you feel like the fatigue of jumping on the next big release as an early adopter. And then down the line, you're like, oh, wow, but now they have this other great feature and you have to refactor everything you did 2 years ago. And if you're a big corporation, obviously you have the resources to do that. But if you have a startup, it's going to be very challenging to keep up to date. And that's why I am actually a very slow mover. My multi-tenant food ordering app is still on PHP 8.2, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm always like 1 or 2 releases behind. So I can, in Dutch we say, you can look the cat out of the tree. It's a proverb. But now in PHP 8.4, you have this beautiful feature with the asymmetric visibility. That is something I would potentially integrate in my project. Not today, not next year, but in a year and a half, maybe I might consider implementing it. So yeah.
It's like the language evolving, and I like this feature. I have use cases for it, but I just wish it was added before read-only, and I would didn't need read-only anymore. And so it was asymmetric visibility was already proposed for 8.3, and then it was denied. And that's very interesting. The PHP Foundation, they wrote a little blog post about it, like comparing the results. And that's another rabbit hole, but like the people who voted no last year just didn't vote anymore this year. It makes you wonder.
I think I saw something around that indeed. Because I have the RFC open here, the asymmetric visibility one, and it's indeed proposed in 2022 already. It's been proposed back then. And like you said, the syntax is a bit special. I thought in my head it was easier to get used to, but if you see it like public private set string bar, that is a bit special indeed.
Yeah, and like keep in mind, like you can combine promoted properties with asymmetric visibility with property hooks. Now try to get a mental image of that.
So you could have a user in its constructor, you have a first name and a last name, and it has only a private setter. So you would say public private set string first name.
Or without the public.
Or without the public private set string last name.
Right, and then then you could still add hooks for those properties. Just
inside
imagine
the
like
constructor as well.
Inside the constructor.
Oh wow, that's indeed wow.
Yeah, so I don't know how I feel about that. Like it's not because it's possible that it should be done, but that's something to consider, and we'll see like what time brings, of course. But
indeed.
But I like the feature, and again, it's one of the things that will make it like require quite a lot of refactoring work within Tempest. But I'm lucky because like no one's using it yet. Well, more and more people are using it. I don't know why.
Yeah, I saw you have like over 1,000 stars on GitHub. That's impressive.
Yeah. And there's a small community around it. So, I mean, I'm proud of what the project is turning into, but it's still alpha. I mean, we can still break a lot of things. It's still greenfield, right? And that's nice because it means like, okay, let's bump to 8.04 and let's change the whole, like 90% of all interfaces. Doesn't really matter. Well, we'll go through the struggles of updating the 1 or 2 projects that are written in Tempest. But It's just nice. I just noticed, by the way, on my blog there, I have a typo there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm scrolling through like the list on my blog here to know what we're talking about. So, asymmetric visibility, property hooks, new without like the brackets. We had lazy objects. There's also an array find function. I just want to mention it. It's pretty like cool. It's one of these things that you say, okay, didn't we have that before? No, we didn't have an array find function.
And it never had an array find.
No, but the thing with array find is that it's the same as what Laravel has with collection first. So it matches you give it a closure, and the first match for which the closure returns true will be returned, and that's it. So it doesn't like find multiple items. If you want to do that, you need array filter.
It was array filter indeed instead of array find. And array filter gives you back an array, obviously, and then you have to take the first index if it was found.
So array find is basically array filter, but it returns as soon as it.
I think I saw a snippet on Twitter on X last night. I think Povilas tweeted it, and it looked so familiar that I was like, huh? Didn't we have this? But it's indeed array filter minus the selection of the first index.
Yeah, but more performant, of course, because with array filter you would have to iterate over all items. And now with array find, it's just early return as soon as you find.
It breaks out of the loop, so to say. Okay, very interesting.
We also have a deprecation. Implicit nullable types are deprecated. And I don't know if you know what these are, but let's say you have a function where you have a typed parameter.
Okay.
I have my example here, save, a function called save, and then it takes a parameter of book, right? You could assign a default value of null to that parameter without marking the type as nullable. And just having that default value as null means the type would become nullable automatically behind the scenes. And that's deprecated.
All right, so now you would have to say like the book is optional.
Yeah, you would like make book either add the question mark or union type with null. This was one of these weird PHP things. And it was added for some kind of reason. I can't remember it. Someone told me and then I forgot about it. So, but I think it's a good thing because it's just very weird too.
And I'm looking at the syntax here. It's also a bit special that you have to say question mark type instead of type question mark in PHP. Yeah. Because other languages have, for example, Swift, you have like the question mark, but they also have like the things like generics, etc. But the question mark comes after the type.
Yeah, I've never really, like PHP is my not my only language, but the only language I really use. So I'm not really used, like this makes sense to me, but I know there are many other languages that turn the question mark around.
Yeah. It's like in the Spanish language where a question starts with a question mark as well. So it kind of makes sense because you see like book with the question mark before, you immediately see like it's nullable. And in other languages, you flip it around, you see like book, but it could be nullable. But it's interesting. It's a small change. So it's deprecated right now, right?
It's
so in PHP 9.
It will be removed in PHP 9.
Okay. All right. So that gives us a lot of time to adapt to that.
There's new HTML5 support, which took them
all right, finally.
It's really nice because we had like this, what was it called? The Mastermind HTML5 package, which was used almost everywhere. And it was a HTML5 parser written in PHP. And this is an HTML5 parser in Rust, I think, that's being wrapped within PHP core.
Okay.
Something like that. So it's more performant. The only thing is, like, and this I learned this because I updated Tempest. So Tempest has a Vue engine, and it's kind of different from Blade or Twig in that it actually parses the DOM and then starts applying changes to it. So I needed a DOM parser basically, so I first used PHP's built-in DOM parser. Of course, it didn't work because it's modern HTML and didn't work. So then I used HTML5 parser from Masterminds, and now I could switch to the new PHP implementation, and it's really nice. Except for there were some, not necessarily like the Mastermind implementation used a spec that was a couple of years old and didn't update afterwards. And apparently, like, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there are no self-closing tags in HTML. Like,
there are no, like, BR?
Yeah, there are some exceptions. Actually, I don't know about this for sure. No, I think like you need to write just BR without a slash. I think that's the right approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
Most browsers,
they don't care.
They don't really care because no browser is 100% spec compliant. But I mean, in Tempest, the view engine, it has view components where you often have self-closing tags, basically, like custom created self-closing tags. And I just assumed, it always worked. I just assumed it was part of the spec, but apparently it wasn't. So suddenly code started to break everywhere. And I was like, what's happening here? And I thought it was a bug with PHP, but no, it's just part of the spec. So I had to, my fix in Tempest, by the way, because this is in the context of a view engine, I can do whatever I want, right? So I can just like PHP does with promoted properties and move them around before actually compiling the code. I could do the same. So I just take the string of text, the HTML, and I will look for self-closing tags before I parse the DOM.
Okay.
I will look for self-closing tags and then replace them.
And then you replace them. Yeah, that's actually really clever.
Yeah, and then I parse the DOM and then everything works.
Yeah, I had a funny discussion with a friend yesterday where, the badges like HTML5 or HTML compliant, CSS compliant. In my entire professional career, I don't think I've written HTML compliant, W3 HTML compliant code. Yeah. And when I was in high school, in university college, that was one of the things that would mean you would fail the class. If you would ever submit something with invalid W3C compliant HTML, you would immediately fail the class. So they really hammered the fact that it needed to be compliant. But in my professional career, never, ever.
That's so old-fashioned because I didn't have that problem in college. We still had to write code on paper. So
nice. Yeah. You're maybe dating yourself here, but
no, I think I'm dating the school. I know you to Ghent, I guess.
I went to Kortrijk.
Of course, That's like the Silicon Valley of
of Belgium
when it comes to IT. I went to Leuven, and it's maybe they were still writing on paper. I don't know. It was. I'm not entirely against it, by the way. It really makes you get a feeling. So it is interesting, but
Like I used Sublime Text for the longest time because it didn't have like all like nowadays I use PHP Storm. I love it. It's super easy to get like the magical features, etc. But I used Sublime Text for the first 5 years of my career because I really wanted to get a feel for the languages I was typing in and get it from my head instead of relying on intelligent autocomplete, etc. And I do think that makes you a better programmer because the longest methods, etc., and it really makes you think in a different way because nowadays it's easy. You turn on JetBrains autocomplete or the AI features or even GitHub Copilot. You don't even write a couple of letters and you get like an auto suggestion. You press tab, and you really don't think about the code as much, but. So I do understand where you're coming from when you say like it's not a bad idea to write code on paper. It really makes you think differently about certain problems.
Yeah, I think actually it's a very interesting topic we need to dive into a bit deeper in another episode. Definitely, indeed. I have some more thoughts about it, but I'll continue with PHP 8.4.
Definitely.
So there were some changes to the JIT as well, but nothing noticeable. And like the JIT, I don't know about the JIT. There are some cases where it really improves performance, but not like for web applications. I benchmarked it again.
Enabled by default, the JIT?
No. Okay. No. And it doesn't really make a difference. Okay. It might even like in some cases it slows down for web apps. But there are some. I heard an example recently where they wrote like a CSS parser in PHP, but I think this was an internal company thing. and they enabled the JIT, and it was 10 times faster.
Wow.
But this is like, those are the things where the JIT is really made for. Like it's useful because you're nested loops basically, and that's what the JIT can really optimize. But it doesn't really happen all that much in web applications.
Yeah, I really don't know a lot about the JIT, but I think it's an interesting topic. I might dive into that a bit more and even do like some benchmarking with my own application, because we do a lot of parsing as well.
Yeah,
so
that could be.
It might have a positive impact on the performance there.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, the JIT just-in-time compiler, and it basically means that this is a part of PHP that will look at PHP as it's executing code, and once it determines that here's a snippet of code that is like looped a lot of times, a hot part of the code, it can take that code and it will try to optimize it and convert it to assembly language basically, so that a huge part of overhead is skipped for that small piece of code, and it's doing all of that on the fly. But there is some overhead doing the checks.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And then generating the code. So, and for web apps, it doesn't, like, I've done quite a few benchmarks over the years, never really seems to make a difference. So,
all right. But nevertheless, a cool addition.
Yeah. What else? There is a new object API for BC Math, and this is actually pretty important. It was like a small feature that I overlooked when I first wrote my 8.4 changelog blog post. So BC Math is this built-in library where you can like work with big numbers, right? And you represent numbers as strings, and then you don't have to deal with floating point errors and stuff like that. Now, this was a collection of functions, like, for example, BC Math add or multiply or divide.
Do you know what it stands for, by the way, BC? Just out of curiosity.
Basic calculator.
Basic calculator. All right.
Yeah.
I just know it's always a reflex when I install PHP on a new server, like BC Math. But you never give it second thought because it's
exactly.
Yeah.
But it has like these functions: BC add, BC seal, compare, div, mod floor, blah blah blah. Right? Basic calculator mathematics. But it's very precise because it's working with strings and it knows how to deal with that. It's approaching math more from like a human point of view instead of a computer point of view, where you run into floating point errors.
Indeed.
So it used to be a collection of functions, and now they've made it into an object-oriented API, and you can just do number one equals new number. So number, it lives in the BC Math namespace. And you pass it a string of a number. And then this is pretty cool. You can actually then, as soon as you have these variables, which are objects, you can use normal arithmetic operators on them. So you can just number one plus number two. So it's operator overloading, kind of for this specific thing managed by PHP itself.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's really cool. So whenever you need to deal with money, for example, is a pretty common use case where you don't want rounding errors and stuff like that. You could now use the object-oriented API, which is much nicer.
I do think money is a special case. I think you have like the package money. It's a
true.
PHP package because it's very, you have like cents. You have to deal with cents, and if you pay, like, for example, you're going out with 3 friends, and the bill is $10 or €10, and you split it equally, someone has to pay 3.34, and all the others have to pay 3.33. So I do think money is a bit of a special use case, but are those cases covered in BC Math, or?
Well, BC Math is just about doing the arithmetic operations on it. So anything like more context would need to be built on top of it. But I'm fairly certain that the money package you're talking about is using BC Math underneath to also like to deal with the calculations and then adds a layer on top of it.
So in theory, you don't have to deal with money as cents anymore, Because that's a popular thing. Instead of saving €1 in the database, you save like 100 cents.
But the problem there is that if you save it in a database, then you would need to save it as a string in a database as well.
Okay.
Because otherwise the database would also have rounding issues, right?
Indeed.
If you would save it as a float. So if you then want to do like arithmetic operations within the database for queries, for example, that would be more difficult. I mean, pros and cons.
So there's no cast function in MySQL, for example. You cannot say, give me all the orders where the value is greater than or equals 100, for example. That would not work anymore if you save it as a string.
If you store them as strings, no.
Okay.
Yeah. So, there's a deprecated attribute now. You can use it instead of like the @deprecated doc block, and kind of works the same. But it's now built into PHP, basically.
That's cool.
And then there were some changes to functions all over the place. I'm not gonna, doesn't make sense to discuss them here because it's a long list. But yeah, PHP 8.04. I mean, super cool release. The biggest things, of course, are like the changes to properties with property hooks and asymmetric visibility. For me, still, the brackets are the biggest.
Obviously,
thing.
Indeed. No, but it's very interesting. Thank you for the overview. I was really surprised by the asymmetric property hooks. I think that's a great addition.
Property hooks.
The property hooks indeed, but the asymmetric visibility. I'm already.
Yeah. It's not confusing at all.
It's not confusing at all. No, but it's very interesting. I definitely give it a go with a new project. But as I said before, my multi-tenant food ordering app will stay on 8.2 for the foreseeable future until it. Do you know by heart when it goes? When it's not managed anymore? When it's not?
No. I can look it up for you. PHP timeline. It's not.
They changed the table. The end of life table is gone.
Yeah, no, it's not gone. Hang on, but it's, I don't know. It doesn't. There's a Google problem, and no one knows how to fix it.
Okay.
And now there's like a like an SEO optimized blog post instead on top of Google, and it's really annoying. Let's see here. PHP 8.2 is in January 2025 it ends like active support, and then it has 2 more years of security fixes.
So I think I might upgrade it within a year. So I might upgrade to I may be jumping to 8.4 directly. I may skip 8.3 as it's a pretty minor release. Nice. But it's a very nice release. It is.
I'm really excited about it. Lots of work to be done still for me as well with Tempest, but it's a big one. I'm happy with it.
Yeah, and do you use what's your upgrade strategy for if you still do projects? I don't know if you still do projects, but what's your typical upgrade strategy?
Rector. Well, I don't do many projects anymore.
Okay.
Like the biggest project I work on is Tempest. But when I use, and we kind of apply the same strategy on Tempest as well, but this combination of Rector and PHP CS fixers to automate whatever is possible. But in case of property hooks and asymmetric visibility, it's not something like a simple syntax change. It's like conceptually changing your interfaces and implementations, and that's not something that's easily automated. So it's manual work.
Indeed. All right, but I think we can wrap it up here.
Yeah, wow.
It's been already over an hour and 15 minutes. So it's been a great talk, Brent. Thank you very much for your time. And that concludes our conversation. Thank you very much for watching or listening. And a big thank you to Brent. You can find him on YouTube over at PHP Annotated, and you can find his blog on Stitcher.io. Let us know what you think of the format and stay tuned for the next episode.